Well, just for a little introduction, tell us something about you.
Something about me.
Yeah, your career in filmmaking, growing up, and so on.
Well, let's see. I'm John Carpenter. I direct movies. I grew up in the south of the United States in a place called Bowling Green, Kentucky. And I fell in love with movies going to see the movies of the 50s. And in 1968, when I was 20 years old, I came to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles and studied motion pictures and eventually have a career in movies.
Okay, and then there comes to Dark Star, the first film.
Uh-huh.
And in a book from Walt Lee, the first version, it was written that the first version runs about 50 minutes. That's correct. Then a version comes out in 1974, I think, with 83 minutes. And now we have here a cover from the special edition, and it is said on it that it runs 91 minutes. Is there a difference between the normal version and the special edition? Do you know something about that?
I believe that the special edition is the full theatrical feature, and I've never seen it, so I don't really know. We started to make a student film back in 1970, and it eventually ended up about 47 or 48 minutes long. And Dan O'Bannon and myself were approached by some investors who said, if we put some more money, why can't you make this into a feature film? And so we did, and eventually got a theatrical release through a company called Bryanston Pictures. They got all their money from releasing a movie called Deep Throat, so they were not really a major studio. And Dark Star was released, I believe, in 1975. And I recall, and this has been many, many years ago, that the movie ran somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90 minutes. Now, I think that O'Bannon had something to do with the special version. He put back some things we cut out, but I've never seen it, so I don't know.
So, your next films are sometimes very violent, not like films which come from Italy, but they have much violence in it. So, you have also shoot comedies and films with social critique. Why do you shoot these films? Because the violent films were much more successful than the other one.
Well, my approach to filmmaking is the story comes first. In other words, if I make movies to tell stories, that's my job. I'm a storyteller. And if a story interests me, I will make it. Whether it's violent, whether it's funny. I got into the movies because I wanted to move people. I wanted people to feel something, whether it would be they'd be scared, or they laugh, or they cry, or whatever. So my first thought is not necessarily a commercial film, but is this a good story to tell? That's probably why.
So, I heard that you're a big fan of John Wayne. That's correct?
Correct.
So, why didn't you shoot a film, a Western? I saw there was a short film, The Resurrection of Bronco Billy.
That's correct.
But why haven't you shot a film, a Western?
Well, as a matter of fact, when I was a young filmmaker in the 70s and I was struggling to get into the Hollywood system, I was writing screenplays. I wrote a screenplay for John Wayne, a Western called Blood River. Unfortunately, by the time I'd finished the screenplay, he was ill with cancer, and I never got a chance to work with him. I've always wanted to make a Western. I began my career in Hollywood wanting to only make Westerns. By the time I was a director, the Western essentially was dead. It was, as a form, as a popular movie, it had stopped being commercially viable. I made a couple of pictures that were kind of Westerns disguised as other things. Assault on Precinct 13, Escape from New York was a kind of a Western, but maybe one day I'll get to do one.
Okay. So, in 4 of your films, you cast Kurt Russell. Why?
Well, Kurt and I began working together on a TV movie I made in 1978 called Elvis. It was the story of Elvis Presley, basically. And I just thought he was a terrific actor. He's a kind of actor who was trained in the old Walt Disney studio system. And he's not like a modern actor in the sense that he's into motivation. He just comes in and does it. He's a very instinctual actor. And we got along very well together. So we decided that whenever there was a part for him and a script that I liked, we'd try to work together. And we have a real good time making movies.
That's great. Okay, now come to your contract with Alive Films. When you did this contract, I heard that it was about 5 films. Is that right? So why did you shoot now a film for another studio?
Part of the contract for Alive said that I could go outside and make a movie someplace. So basically, I'd made 2 movies under the Universal Alive agreement, Prince of Darkness and They Live. And my agent turned to me one day and said, you ought to make a mainstream movie. You ought to make a Hollywood movie, and to do something different. So along came this screenplay called Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Chevy Chase was the star, Daryl Hannah was in it, and it's a $40 million film. I said, why not? It's a comedy. It's going to be released January or February in the United States.
So, but just because of the fact that it cost $40 million, isn't there control from the producers? Is something you denied?
Well, I tell you what, it's any movie that costs over 20 or 30 million, you know that the studios are going to try to interfere creatively with you. And there are 2 ways to deal with it. One way is to insist in the contract that you have final cut. Now, final cut gives the director the ultimate control over it. I wasn't able to bring my final cut situation from Universal over to Warner Brothers, so I had to make a decision. Do I want to make the movie or not? So I took another tactic, and this is a tactic used by most directors in the history of Hollywood. And what you do is, when somebody starts to tell you what to do, you yell and scream so loud that you scare them away. And I had to fight tooth and nail to keep my vision of the film intact.
And what's about now the contract with Alive Films? Will there be a second part of Escape from New York, also like a second part of They Live?
No, I think that we're thinking about doing a remake of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is a 1950s monster movie that I'm a particular fan of. And the Alive contract has been changed to increase the budget, so we're going to do a little bit larger budget film.
So now stuck on Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like on The Thing, you're now doing a remake on this film, and The Thing wasn't very successful in the first time, is that right? It was a little bit ahead of time, some people say. Do you think this is right? And the other thing, why are you going to do a remake of a film?
Well, the thing was, came out in the summer of 1982, and I don't know if you're aware of those particular times in America. Reagan had become president just recently, and a movie came out 2 weeks before we opened. It was called E.T., and it captured the imagination of the American public, and it was a very sweet, gentle, happy movie about this friendly little alien. 2 weeks later comes The Thing, which is about the end of mankind, and it was a ferocious movie. I don't think people had seen a monster movie quite like that before. It upset a lot of people. It was very disturbing. And I would say we were the victim of very bad timing. Essentially, it's one of the movies I'm the proudest of. I really, really love The Thing a lot. Why do a remake? The only reason to do a remake of something like The Creature from the Black Lagoon is if I think I can bring something new to it that wasn't done the first time. And the creature's essentially like King Kong. It's Beauty and the Beast. He's a kind of noble savage. And I'd like to do an updating of that story. I think that I could also do something better with the costume. I've talked to Rick Baker, who is a special effects creator, and he would love to give a shot at the creature, so maybe we'll do it.
Okay. So what do you think of the violence in films generally?
Well, violence. Violence is an interesting topic. It's always been in movies. Violence was in movies in the very beginning. Back in a picture called The Great Train Robbery, which was a silent film. In the end of the movie, this cowboy takes his gun and points it right at the audience and shoots. And the audience at the time, oh, God, just upset them. I'm not familiar with a movie called The Wild Bunch. It was an extremely violent movie. It depends on the story you're telling. I think that you have to be careful that you're not advocating violence. By that I mean you're not suggesting that violence is a way to solve problems. Violence should be the last possible thing that you try in a bad situation. However, you get into a movie and let's say like Halloween, you have a killer who's out there and you kind of have to deal with that area. I've made some violent movies and it's fun. It's fun making violent films. It's a lot of fun to do it. I mean, actors seem to always want to die on the screen. They love it. I think you have to be careful with audiences. Probably the most violent scene or the most disturbing scene I've ever done in a film was in a picture I made called Assault on Precinct 13. There's a little girl who gets shot with a silencer. And audiences were very, very upset at that.
So do you think that violence is dangerous for the audience, that some people get cracked up from this violence in these films, like
Cracked up?
some of the censors say?
No, it's not. Movies don't cause that. Real life causes that. It's emotional, physical, and sexual abuse causes people to murder other people. Movies don't do it. 98% of the audience who goes to see a film understands that that is fantasy up there. That's not a real thing that you're looking at. But there are a certain number of people who will always think that what they're seeing is real. They're disturbed individuals, and there's nothing you can do about them. They also might see a Mickey Mouse cartoon and go and murder somebody, too. You never know.
Yeah, right. When Romero shoots Monkey Shines and Cronenberg, the twins...
Dead Ringers?
Dead Ringers, right. That wasn't a very violent film. Do you think this is the right way, having more suspense in films than violence?
I think it entirely depends on the story that you want to tell. I do know that, in America at least, the horror film is kind of dying out as a popular genre because the action movie has stolen all of its techniques. If you look at a movie like Die Hard 2, and there's a slitting of the throat and so forth, and knives going in, they're right out of horror films. As a matter of fact, the director is a horror movie director. So Terminator 2 is basically a horror film. All those techniques that we used to use in horror are now in the big budget action film. So I think maybe the market for horror films is beginning to change, and at least it is in America. There are a couple of kind of yuppie horror films in America. Fatal Attraction is one of them. That audiences go to see. I think they feel more comfortable because they know that they're not going to be disturbed by anything because Michael Douglas is in the film. You know, he's not going to do anything really scary to them, which is unfortunate. I think one of the good things about a horror movie is that you should never be quite sure what they're going to show you on the screen. It'll put you a little bit ill at ease, like, am I going to see something that's going to disturb me? Because frankly, horror is about fear, about frightening things. You should be scared.
So, and what do you think about the changing from the normal horror film with suspense in it to a splatter film? You have more and more splatter films are produced in every country.
Splatter films?
Yeah.
Well, splatter films, it's hard to know what you mean by that. I mean, you could say Psycho is a splatter film. You're talking about where the death and carnage is done like a ballet, and that's the only purpose of the movie. That becomes like pornography. Now, people watch pornography to watch the kind of sexual circus going on, but there's no substance. I'm afraid that you can't divorce violence from a story. You can't divorce it from character. The minute that you start doing that, then you really are not, you're really in a little trouble. There was a series of films in the United States called Friday the 13th, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And one of the ways they made those movies was to make every teenage character the same. There was no character, no difference between them. And they did this on purpose. They did it so that the audience would yell and scream at these stupid teenagers because they were always getting killed. Now that to me is another form of pornography. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right to do. because all you're doing is you're debasing human values. I don't mind seeing a movie where people are involved in some sort of violence, but you've got to have some sort of character content behind it. You've got to care about the people. There should be a consequence for violence. A violent act should come with it some consequence for the people, because violence has a consequence for everyone.
Right. So another difference between the older horror films and the horror films today are that the stars from the older horror films were really stars, like Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and so on. Today, you have these stars. You have, well, let me say something like Freddy, Jason, Leatherface. They're not stars, they're figures. Why do you think this comes today?
Cartoon characters.
Okay.
That comes out of the popularity of comic books. It comes out of the idea of somebody wearing a mask. It comes out of superheroes. But really, when you think about it, it's not too much different than Boris Karloff and the kind of Frankenstein monster he made popular. It was played by various people, but it's the same kind of makeup over and over again. It's just a new version of that. Kids began to identify with the bad guy in horror films and began to like the bad guy because he was the smartest guy around. Everybody else was so stupid. They just walk into a room and get murdered. So part of it also is the people who tend to go to horror movies are adolescents. And they go because horror films are usually anti-authority movies. In other words, they break the rules. They get to laugh at people getting killed, and that's not something that's really acceptable around the house with mom and dad. So a whole lot of that is about society and about kids growing up. The older you get in life, the less you're inclined to want to go to see one of those movies because you experience fear and violence in real life. For instance, just recently in America there was a shooting in Killeen, Texas, where 22 people were murdered by a guy who walked in with a gun and just started shooting them. I don't think the people of that town are going to want to go see a horror movie. It's not funny to them. It's not entertaining. It's right in their lives. But a kid who's, you know, been to school all his life and has had basically kind of a boring life goes for entertainment. It doesn't bother him. Also, kids think they're going to live forever. There's a time in your life when you're beginning to mature and your testosterone and your hormones are raging away and all these things are coming along and you believe in your mind that I'm never going to die. Well, guess what? You will. We all will. We all go down that long road.
Yeah, of course. So, next question. So, some facts about you. Can you give us some of your films you like most and some of your books you like most?
You mean movies that I love that are not mine? Well, my favorite director is Howard Hawks. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
The Thing and so on.
Well, not really that one so much. He made all kinds of movies from the silent films all the way up till 1970. Probably my favorite film is Only Angels Have Wings. I love Rio Bravo and The Searchers. I love Forbidden Planet, Vertigo. I love almost all of Louis Buñuel's films. I would say probably my favorite is Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. I love Polanski's work, Hitchcock, most of the classic directors.
Classic films. Mm-hmm. So, what will really scare you?
Loss of control.
Of control of your body, control of your mind?
Anything. Loss of control of life, of bodily function. I mean, imagine if you were old enough and you get this disease, in America we call it Alzheimer's disease, where you begin to slowly forget who you are, loss of identity. I at one point had to kind of deal with the idea of personal courage in my life. I wanted to find out if I was making movies about people who were heroes. I wanted to find out what that meant. So I learned to fly a helicopter. And one of the techniques that you have to master in order to get a pilot's license is you take the helicopter up in the air and you shut off the engine and you land without an engine. And you do it day in and day out, over and over and over again. Well, the first time I did it, you know, it's terrifying because you have no You have no engine, you have no net below you, you're going to die. And by the end of it, after I'd done it enough times, it was actually kind of fun. And this was my way of kind of gaining control over something. And ever since then, I slept very peacefully every night.
So let's go back to your new film, Memoirs of the Invisible Man.
Okay.
There's another one about the Invisible Man, shot from Brian Usner. He's the director.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Can you tell us something about your story, and do you know something about Usner's film?
I don't know anything about the other Invisible Man. I know that Columbia was trying to get one going, and Universal was trying to get one going. And I'm not sure. I know there's an Invisible Man picture out where the Invisible Man eats human flesh. I assume that's the one that you're talking about. My Invisible Man picture is called Memoirs of the Invisible Man. It stars Chevy Chase, Daryl Hannah, and Sam Neill. It's from a book written in the 80s, and it's basically a comedy, a broad comedy. And it's about what happens when this guy gets turned invisible and all the misadventures that happen to him. It's taken from the point of view that when you were young, you used to think that being invisible would be fun. You could watch people look up girls' dresses, go into bathrooms, and so forth. But basically, it's not much fun. And it's an out-and-out comedy. Nobody eats human flesh.
Right. How was working with Chevy Chase?
Chevy Chase is a big movie star in the United States. Now, in Europe, not so much, I don't think. I don't think he's liked as much as he may be in the United States. He bought the book and optioned it and was basically kind of a, excuse me, a producer. So I had to deal with him in a couple of different capacities. He turned out the best performance of his career in my film. I'm very proud of his work. He did very, very well.
Okay. So why was so a long break between They Live and now the Memoirs of the Invisible Man?
I think that when you get older and older and you're a director, you begin to realize that the physical act of directing is a little like being a coal miner. You have to get up in the middle of the night, and you have to work in very terrible conditions, and you get very sick, and the entire crew gets the flu, and you stay up extremely late, and the fatigue factor is enormous. And I found myself with a 7-year-old kid who I had been away from enormous amounts of time, and I was extremely tired. So I said to myself, I need a break here. I need to slow down. I think in 10 years I'd made 14 films, and that's a lot of work. You'll understand one day when you get old.
I think so. So what are your future plans for new films?
I just signed the new extension on the Alive deal at Universal. We're going to make 3 more films over there. There are a lot of new movies opening up. I'm sensing a change in the market in America. And the movies are starting to change a little bit. They won't quite be like they were in the 80s. And hopefully I'll get to do the opportunity to do some things I've always wanted to do. Maybe a little bit differently than the fantasy genre, not science fiction or horror, but I'd love to try my hand at a musical one day, or Western, a romantic comedy. And as I get older and older, these movies are probably not going to be made at the same pace. So there'll be a lot more work done on the screenplay. The budgets will be bigger. But directing has always been a part of my life, something I love. I know how to do it. If I didn't direct, I don't know what I'd do. Probably sit around and talk about the old days.
That wouldn't be good. Not good for the audience. So did you have ever trouble with the MPAA?
Well, I've had a little trouble now and again with them. You know, I hate censorship of any kind. I really disagree with it philosophically. But the MPAA is a body of people that come in and rate your movie, and really who they are is school teachers and people from shopping malls, kind of middle Americans. There was one picture that the MPAA wanted to rate X for a certain couple of violent scenes. But luckily I was with a major studio. The strange thing is the major studio simply called them on the phone and said no. And they said okay. So they have a job to do, but like any censor, I think it should be incredibly hard for them. I wish the world wasn't that way. I wish that everything would be allowed, but that's not the way it goes.
So what do you think from the changing of the rating from X to NC-17?
I think that it filled a void that has been in films since the 70s. Basically, when the X rating came in, there were some serious movies made. Midnight Cowboy, for instance, was an X-rated film. Then the pornographers took it over, and pornographic films were X. And there's a problem in the United States, is that most newspapers will not advertise an X-rated film. So the studios don't make them because they can't advertise them. That's the only reason. It's only money. So along comes a serious film, let's say not a non-pornographic film, that has X-rated material. So what do? So they created a new category which says to the audience, look, you know, this is not pornography, but it isn't appropriate for people under 17, so they make a new category. And hopefully they'll be able to advertise it in the newspapers. So it's kind of a good thing, but you're talking to somebody who thinks that you should abolish all that. So I have mixed feelings about it.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
With whom would you like to work in the future?
Well, with whom would I like to work?
Yeah.
That's a hard question. I've just met a cameraman who I love very dearly. He's 70 years old. He's been around Hollywood for a long time. I had a terrific time together on The Invisible Man. His name is William Fraker. He shot Rosemary's Baby, Bullet, and he's done a whole lot of work throughout his career. And he is a real old-fashioned cameraman, and he and I got along tremendously. I'd love to work with him again. It was just a delight.
And from the side of the actors and actresses?
It depends on the story. In other words, what drives me as a director, my master is the story. That's the master that I serve. I must bow to the story at every turn, because essentially that's all a director is. He's just a storyteller. And you try to get the best actor you can for the role, and that's the name of the game.
Okay.
Very good.
Well, thank you for the interview,
you.
and good luck for your future.
Thank you.